My grandmother destroyed my wedding day with 7 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about the man I'd just married. What she told me in that quiet corner of the reception hall didn't just change my marriage, it changed my entire understanding of who I was and what I was capable of doing when everything I believed turned out to be a lie. I'm still shaking as I write this, 3 days after what should have been the happiest day of my life. My dress is still hanging in my closet, covered in champagne stains and tear marks, and I can't decide if I should burn it or keep it as a reminder of how naive I used to be. My phone has been buzzing nonstop with congratulations messages from people who have no idea that the fairy tale wedding they witnessed was actually the beginning of my worst nightmare. The worst part? Part of me wishes she had never said anything at all. 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was a perfect life. My fiancé David and I had been together for 3 years, and everything felt like it was falling into place exactly the way it was supposed to. We'd met at a coffee shop near my office, one of those meet-cute stories that made our friends roll their eyes and beg us to stop telling it at dinner parties. David was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. He was charming, successful in his marketing career, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room when he looked at me. He remembered little things, how I liked my coffee, that I got anxious in crowded places, that I always ordered dessert first when I was stressed. My friends adored him. My coworkers were jealous, and even my notoriously picky mother had given him her seal of approval after their first meeting. The proposal was perfect too, of course. A weekend trip to the mountains, a sunrise hike to our favorite lookout point, and a ring hidden in his backpack for weeks, without me suspecting a thing. I said yes before he even finished asking the question, and we spent the rest of the morning crying happy tears and calling everyone we knew. Wedding planning had been a dream. David was involved in every decision, never once complaining about flower arrangements or seating charts. He even suggested we have the reception at the historic mansion where my grandparents had their wedding anniversary party every year, a detail that made my grandmother beam with pride and made me fall in love with him even more. But now I realize that his enthusiasm wasn't romantic. It was strategic. My grandmother, Nana Rose, had been my rock my entire life. After my parents divorced when I was 12, she was the one who picked up the pieces, who taught me that love didn't have to hurt, who showed me what a strong woman looked like. At 82, she was still sharp as a tack, still called people out on their nonsense, and still had an uncanny ability to see through people's facades in a way that sometimes made family gatherings uncomfortable. She'd been quieter than usual during the engagement, but I'd attributed it to her age and the overwhelming nature of wedding planning. I should have known better. Nana Rose was never quiet unless she was planning something. The wedding itself was everything I'd dreamed of. The weather was perfect. The flowers were stunning. And David looked incredible in his navy suit as I walked down the aisle. When he took my hands and whispered, "You're so beautiful," I felt like I was floating. The ceremony was a blur of happy tears, laughter from our guests, and the overwhelming feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The reception was in full swing when it happened. I was making my way back from the bathroom, still floating on cloud 9 from our first dance, when I felt a firm hand on my arm. It was Nana Rose, and the expression on her face immediately sent a chill down my spine. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to you," she said in that tone that meant business. "Right now." She guided me to a quiet alcove near the back of the hall, away from the music and laughter. My heart started pounding, but I assumed she wanted to give me some marriage advice or share a sentimental moment. Instead, she took both of my hands in hers and looked me directly in the eyes. "That's not the man you think he is," she said simply. I laughed nervously. "Nana, what are you talking about? It's my wedding day." "His name isn't David Martinez," she continued, her voice steady and sure. "It's David Mitchell. And he's been married before. Twice. The world seemed to tilt sideways. The sounds of the reception faded into white noise, and I felt like I might throw up all over my wedding dress. "That's impossible," I whispered. "You're confused. You must be thinking of someone else." But Nana Rose wasn't confused. She reached into her small evening purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I hired a private investigator 3 months ago," she said. "I'm sorry, darling, but something about him never sat right with me." My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. It was a printed report with David's photo, my David. But underneath were details that made my knees buckle. David Mitchell, divorced twice. Both marriages ending in restraining orders. A history of financial fraud, a pattern of targeting successful women, gaining their trust, and systematically draining their resources. "This has to be a mistake," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, little things started clicking into place. How he'd been vague about his family history, how he'd suggested we open a joint savings account for the future, how he'd been so interested in my work connections and financial situation. I sank into a nearby chair, my wedding dress pooling around me like a white lie. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed, but at the time I was so caught up in what I thought was love that I ignored every red flag. David had told me he'd grown up in foster care, that he didn't like talking about his past because it was too painful. As someone who'd grown up with divorce and family drama, I understood the desire to leave the past behind and focus on building something new. He'd moved to our city just a year before we met, claiming he'd gotten a job transfer from his company's branch in Denver. When I'd asked about visiting his old life or meeting friends from before, he'd always deflected, saying he preferred to live in the present. "Why look backward when we have such an amazing future ahead of us?" he'd say, and I'd melt every time. The job thing should have been a bigger red flag. He claimed to work in digital marketing for a mid-sized company, but he worked from home most days and was always vague about projects and clients. When I'd suggest meeting him for lunch or stopping by his office, he'd say he was in meetings or traveling to client sites. I'd been so busy with my own demanding job at the law firm that I hadn't questioned it too deeply. Then there were the money conversations. About 6 months into our relationship, he'd casually mentioned that he was having some cash flow issues because his company was slow to reimburse travel expenses. I'd started picking up more dinner tabs, more weekend trips, more of the daily expenses that couples share. It felt natural at the time. I made good money, and I loved spoiling him. But looking at Nana's report, I realized it was part of a pattern. The most painful realization was remembering how he'd encouraged me to trust him with my vulnerabilities. He'd been so patient when I'd told him about my parents' messy divorce, so understanding when I'd shared my fears about commitment and being hurt. He'd made me feel safe enough to let my guard down completely, and now I understood that my openness had been a weapon he'd used against me. My grandmother had seen through it all. She'd watched him charm our family, watched him seamlessly integrate into our lives, and something in her gut had screamed that it was all too perfect. While I was planning our future, she was protecting it. "I wanted to be wrong," she told me later. "I prayed every night that I was just being a paranoid old woman. But sweetie, I've lived too long and seen too much to ignore my instincts about people." The private investigator had been thorough. David's first wife had been a successful real estate agent in Phoenix. He'd convinced her to put his name on her business accounts, then systematically drained them before disappearing. The second wife was a teacher in Denver who'd inherited money from her parents. Same pattern: gain trust, access finances, vanish when the money was gone. But I wasn't just a financial target. According to the report, I was his most ambitious project yet. My job at the law firm, my family's connections, my grandmother's wealth, he'd been playing a much longer game with me. Standing in that alcove, Holding evidence of my husband's lies, I felt like I was watching my life crumble in slow motion. Through the archway, I could see David charming my coworkers, laughing with my cousins, playing the perfect groom. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could the man who'd held me while I cried about work stress be the same person who'd systematically destroyed two other women's lives? What am I supposed to do with this? I asked Nana Rose, my voice barely a whisper. It's my wedding day. There are 200 people here. The photographer is expecting us to cut the cake in 20 minutes. You're supposed to save yourself, she said firmly, before it's too late. But it felt like it was already too late. We'd just signed marriage documents. We had a joint bank account with our wedding money. I'd given him keys to my apartment, access to my life, trust in my future. The thought of walking back into that reception and pretending everything was normal felt impossible. But the thought of confronting this reality felt even worse. I made it through the cake cutting by sheer force of will, smiling for photos while my mind raced through every conversation, every decision, every moment of the past 3 years. When David leaned over to whisper, "Having the best day of my life," I nearly broke down completely. The next few hours were torture. I danced with my father while calculating how much money David had access to. I hugged well-wishers while wondering which details of my life he'd use against me. I threw my bouquet while planning how to quietly investigate the claims in Nana's report. The breaking point came during our last dance. As David spun me around the dance floor, he leaned close and said, "I can't wait to start our real life together tomorrow. I have some ideas about investments we should make with the wedding money." My blood turned to ice. The wedding money. Nearly $15,000 in cash gifts that we'd agreed to put toward a down payment on a house. Money that, as of today, he had legal access to as my husband. That's when I knew Nana Rose was right. This wasn't paranoia or confusion. This was a pattern, and I was the next mark. I excused myself to the bathroom and called the private investigator whose number was on the report. Even though it was nearly midnight, she answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. "Your grandmother warned me this might happen tonight." "Is it all true?" I asked. "Every word. And there's more. He's been scouting your financial situation for months. Your bank statements, your credit report, your grandmother's assets. He's done his homework." I felt sick. What do I do? Document everything. Don't let him know you know. And whatever you do, don't give him access to anything else. But when I returned to the reception, David was waiting with a concerned expression. "You were gone for a while, baby. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. Just overwhelmed by how perfect everything is. He pulled me close. "It's just the beginning, Mrs. Martinez. Tomorrow we start our new life together." That's when I realized the name thing wasn't just an alias for his criminal activities. He'd been planning to completely reinvent himself through our marriage, using my reputation and connections to build a new identity while systematically destroying my financial security. The rest of the reception passed in a haze of fake smiles and growing panic. Every time someone called me Mrs. Martinez, I felt like I was disappearing a little more. We got back to my apartment at nearly 2 a.m., both exhausted but wired from the day's events. David immediately started talking about our honeymoon plans, about the house hunting we'd do when we got back, about all the ways our life was going to change. I nodded along while internally preparing for the conversation that would change everything. "David," I said, when he finally paused for breath, "we need to talk." Something in my tone must have warned him because his expression shifted immediately. The warm, loving look I'd grown accustomed to was replaced by something warier, more calculating. "About what, babe?" "It's been a long day. Can it wait until tomorrow?" "No," I said, pulling the investigator's report from my purse. "It can't." The change in him was instant and dramatic. The man I thought I'd married disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. He didn't even try to deny it. "So the old bitch finally showed her hand," he said, his voice completely different, harsher, with an accent I'd never heard before. I was wondering when she'd make her move. "Is any of it true?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. "Does it matter? We're married now, sweetheart. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. That's how this works." "That's not how anything works," I said, my voice getting stronger. "You lied about everything. Your name, your past, your intentions. I gave you exactly what you wanted," he interrupted. "A perfect boyfriend, a perfect fiancé, a perfect wedding. You ate it up. You never questioned anything because you didn't want to know the truth." The cruelty in his voice was like a slap. This was the real David. Or whoever he actually was. All the tenderness, all the romance, all the love I thought we'd shared had been a performance. "I want you to leave," I said. "Leave?" He laughed again. "I don't think so. We just got married, remember? This is my home now, too. These are my assets now, too. You can't just decide you don't like what you signed up for." That's when I realized how dangerous this situation really was. He wasn't just a financial predator. He was someone who felt entitled to whatever he could take, and he wasn't planning to make this easy. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone. He grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt but firm enough to stop me. "And tell them what? That your husband hurt? Your feelings? That you're having second thoughts about your marriage? They'll laugh at you." He was right, and we both knew it. I had no legal grounds to force him to leave. We were married. The apartment was technically his now, too. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want what I've been working toward for 3 years," he said. "A comfortable life, funded by your success. You're going to be a very successful lawyer, and I'm going to enjoy the benefits of that success. Your grandmother's money doesn't hurt either." "And if I refuse?" His smile was cold. "Then things get unpleasant for everyone. Your career, your family's reputation, your precious grandmother's golden years. It would be such a shame if any of that got disrupted." That's when I understood that this wasn't just about money. This was about power, control, and a complete disregard for my humanity. He'd studied me, manipulated me, and married me with the full intention of using me until there was nothing left. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated both me and my grandmother. I didn't sleep that night. David had eventually gone to bed in what was now our room, acting like our confrontation had been a minor disagreement rather than the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life. I sat in my living room, still in my wedding dress, making phone calls and planning my next moves. The first call was to my lawyer, not my boss, but a family friend who specialized in divorce and family law. Even at 3 a.m., she agreed to meet me first thing in the morning. The second call was to my bank, leaving messages to freeze all accounts and block any new access. The third was to my grandmother. "I knew you'd figure it out," Nana Rose said when I told her what had happened. "You're stronger than he thinks you are." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel like an idiot." "You feel like someone who trusted in good faith and had that trust betrayed," she corrected. "That's not weakness, sweetheart. That's being human." By morning, I had a plan. My lawyer confirmed that while David had legal rights as my spouse, his fraud and the circumstances of our marriage gave us grounds for annulment rather than divorce. The private investigator had already contacted David's previous victims, and they were willing to testify about his pattern of behavior. When David woke up, I was dressed for work and had papers waiting for him on the kitchen table. "What's this?" he asked, all traces of the previous night's menace replaced by confusion. "Annulment papers," I said. You can sign them voluntarily, or you can deal with criminal fraud charges and testimony from Sarah in Phoenix and Linda in Denver. Your choice. His mask slipped again, but this time I wasn't afraid. I had backup plans, security cameras I'd installed that morning, and my phone ready to call 911. More importantly, I had my power back. You can't prove anything, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I can prove enough, I replied. And even if I couldn't, do you really want to spend the next few years in court battles while I make your life as difficult as you plan to make mine? He signed the papers. By noon, he was gone from my apartment. By the end of the week, the annulment was filed. By the end of the month, David Mitchell, or whatever his real name was, had disappeared from my city entirely, presumably to find his next target somewhere else. The hardest part wasn't dealing with him. It was dealing with everyone else. The friends who'd celebrated with us, the family members who'd given us gifts, the co-workers who'd taken the day off to attend our wedding. How do you explain that your marriage was a lie without sounding like you're making excuses for a change of heart? Most people were understanding, especially when I explained the basic facts without going into the more painful details. But some relationships didn't survive the awkwardness and confusion. Some people couldn't understand how I hadn't known, couldn't accept that someone could be so thoroughly deceived. That was almost harder than losing David, because those reactions made me question everything about my judgment and my worth. 6 months later, I can finally look back on that night with something approaching gratitude. Not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the strength I discovered I had when everything fell apart. I learned that I could trust my instincts when they were screaming at me, that I could take decisive action even when I was terrified, and that I could rebuild my life from the ground up if necessary. The therapy helped too. Working through the manipulation, the gaslighting, and the systematic way David had eroded my confidence taught me to recognize the warning signs I'd missed. I learned that being trusting isn't a character flaw, but that blind trust without verification is dangerous. I learned the difference between love and performance, between genuine connection and skilled manipulation. Most importantly, I learned to trust my grandmother's instincts as much as my own. Nana Rose had seen what I couldn't see, because she loved me enough to look past the surface charm to the character underneath. Her willingness to be the bad guy in my story probably saved my financial future, my emotional health, and possibly my physical safety. I'm dating again now, but differently. I ask more questions, I verify stories. I pay attention to inconsistencies and trust my gut when something feels off. I'm not paranoid, but I'm not naive either. There's a balance between being open to love and protecting yourself from people who would exploit that openness. The wedding dress is gone now, donated to a charity that provides formal wear to women re-entering the workforce. I kept the shoes, though. They're beautiful, and they remind me that I have the strength to walk away from anything that isn't serving me, even on what's supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My relationship with Nana Rose is stronger than ever. She's my hero, my protector, and my reminder that love sometimes means being willing to be unpopular in service of someone's well-being. She taught me that strong women look out for each other, even when it's difficult. I don't regret the 3 years I spent with David, because they taught me things about myself I needed to know. I learned I'm capable of deep love, complete trust, and total vulnerability. I also learned I'm capable of recognizing when those gifts are being abused and taking swift action to protect myself. So here's my question for you. Did I handle this right? Should I have given him more of a chance to explain? Tried to work things out despite the lies? Was my grandmother wrong to interfere? Or was she the hero of this story? Part of me still wonders if there's some other version of this story where David was genuine, where the investigation was wrong, where I threw away real love because of fear and suspicion. But mostly, I know that trust, once broken this completely, can't be rebuilt on the same foundation. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted him immediately at the wedding, or would you have played along until you had more information? And how do you balance being open to love with protecting yourself from people who would take advantage of that openness? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know how this story sounds from the outside, because I'm still processing it all myself.